Before we begin, I want to welcome you to the channel. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing. And before we get into today's story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been a respiratory therapist for 9 years before she clocked the pattern in the ICU's overnight ventilator failures. And even then, it took 3 separate incidents, 2 months apart, before she trusted the part of her brain screaming that this wasn't random. Ventilators fail sometimes, that's just complex machinery running non-stop in a high-stakes room. But these had a signature that had her spooked in a way she couldn't back up to her supervisor with numbers alone. Each one hit between 3:14 and 3:22 in the morning. Each one hit bed 7, and each time, according to the monitors, the room's temp dropped a few degrees in the 60 seconds before the alarm went off. A drop facilities could never explain, and eventually stopped even trying to. She might have let it slide as a creepy coincidence if the third one hadn't nearly cost a patient his life. Bed 7 that week held a guy named Danny Osborne, recovering from a car wreck that left him with lung trauma so bad he was fully dependent on the vent to breathe. And at 3:17, the alarm started screaming a full 10 seconds before Sarah, watching remotely, saw the readout showing the tubing had somehow come disconnected. Not malfunctioned. Disconnected. The kind of thing that takes actual hands. She sprinted the length of the ward and reached him in under a minute, hooking the line back up with fingers that wouldn't quite quit shaking, and Danny pulled through with no lasting damage. But what stuck with her wasn't the emergency. It was that when she burst through the door, for half a second before training took over, she thought she saw a shape at the head of the bed. Tall, still, wearing what looked like an old hospital gown from way before the current ICU existed, gone by the time her eyes caught up. Sarah didn't believe in ghosts, in the stubborn, evidence-only way of somebody who built a whole career on vital signs. So her first move was treating it like a mechanical or human screw-up instead of anything spooky. She pulled maintenance logs on that vent, found nothing wrong. Checked hallway camera footage for the window in question. Nobody in or out of bed 7's room. She even quietly pulled the hospital's old blueprints for that section of the ICU, curious what used to sit there, and found bed 7 occupied the same footprint, several floors up, as what used to be the hospital's original isolation ward, decommissioned and built over during a big renovation back in the 60s. That isolation ward, she learned from an old facilities report buried in a shared drive nobody had cleaned out in decades, went up during a stretch when the hospital handled overflow from a regional outbreak the public records barely touched on. Details apparently lost or scrubbed on purpose, though the report noted a suspiciously high count of patient deaths chalked up to equipment failure over an 18-month run before the ward got quietly shut down and its staff scattered without explanation. One name showed up over and over in the surviving logs, a respiratory tech named Walter Hale, written up twice for improper equipment maintenance after 2 separate patient deaths, both involving disconnected breathing gear. Both, Sarah confirmed after cross-checking the timestamps on several sleepless nights, happening between 3:10 and 3:25 in the morning. No record of what happened to Walter after that second write-up. His file just stops. No resignation letter, no termination notice. Just a blank stretch where an explanation should have been. She sat with that blank a long time, unable to decide whether it bothered her more to imagine he'd been quietly canned and vanished into nowhere, or that something else went down during that second citation, something the hospital decided 50 years ago not to put on paper. The 4th incident hit 2 weeks later, different room this time, but the patient's bed, she confirmed afterward with a grim kind of satisfaction, sat almost exactly where the old isolation ward's equipment closet used to be. This time, Sarah was already up, already watching, having started spending her breaks near the nurse's station just so she could reach any hit room in seconds. And at 3:19, she caught, faintly down the hall, that particular high whine a vent makes right before an alarm fully kicks in. She was moving before she'd even decided to move, and this time, rounding into the room, she saw the shape clear enough that no amount of adrenaline or bad lighting could explain it away later. A man in dated hospital gear, hunched over the tubing with his back to her, hands working at something she couldn't see. And when she yelled out without thinking, He turned his head just enough for her to catch the outline of a face, before he simply wasn't there, gone like a held breath letting go, leaving the tubing disconnected and the patient's oxygen already sliding. She saved that one too. But after, alone in the supply closet catching her breath, she found herself thinking less about her own fear and more about Walter Hale, cited twice, blank file, vanished, and about the possibility, unscientific as it felt, that he wasn't haunting the ward out of spite at all, just stuck reliving a screw-up he was never allowed to explain or fix, running the same mistake in the same window night after night, because whatever was left of him didn't know how to do anything else. She put in for a formal transfer to days the following week, citing burnout, which wasn't exactly a lie. The overnight vent failures around bed 7 didn't stop after she left. They just became somebody else's 3 a.m. problem, logged as equipment malfunctions of unknown origin. Same as always. Same, she figures, as they always will be, as long as that stretch of the hospital keeps admitting patients who need a machine to breathe for them through the night. Dr. Emily Carter was 6 weeks into her pediatric residency when she started noticing that room 214 rubbed her wrong in a way she couldn't explain without sounding unprofessional. And unprofessional was the last thing a first-year resident could afford at Whitmore Children's, where every senior doc seemed to be sizing her up non-stop for the smallest slip. The room itself was nothing special, same pale walls, same cartoon decals peeling at the corners, same recliner for parents crashing overnight, but the temperature never quite matched the rest of the ward. A stubborn coolness facilities checked twice and found nothing wrong with. And the quiet in there felt to Emily less like plain silence and more like sound being held back on purpose. She might have written the whole thing off if not for her third overnight shift, called to 214 for a 4-year-old named Oliver, recovering from a routine appendectomy, no complications expected. She found him sitting up wide awake at nearly 2 in the morning, despite sedation that should have had him out cold for hours, chatting quietly with the empty chair beside his bed, like he was picking up a conversation that had been going a while. When Emily asked, gentle, who he was talking to, he looked at her with that blunt honesty little kids have before the world teaches them to filter, and said he was talking to the other boy, the one who used to stay in this room a long time ago, and still came back sometimes because he got lonely, and who told Oliver the hospital used to be way scarier before they fixed the doors so kids couldn't get locked in anymore. Emily chalked it up that night to anesthesia and a 4-year-old's imagination. The kind of thing she'd been warned about. Post-op confusion, vivid but temporary. 2 weeks later, though, a different kid in that same room, a 7-year-old named Molly recovering from a tonsillectomy, described the exact same companion in almost identical words. A boy, younger than her, who liked sitting at the foot of the bed talking about being locked somewhere dark and cold for a long time before somebody found him, though he could never quite remember who, or when, or how long a long time even was. Molly wasn't scared of him, she insisted, just sad for him, because he seemed like he'd been waiting on something and had mostly given up believing it would happen. Emily started digging into the building's history, quiet, off the books, more out of a growing unease than any professional obligation. Whitmore Children's had been built on the footprint of an older general hospital. She learned off a framed timeline in the lobby she must have walked past 100 times without reading, and buried in a local historical society's digitized newspaper archive, found after an embarrassing number of late-night searches. She dug up a brief 1962 article about a fire in a supply closet on the pediatric floor that trapped a young patient nearly 40 minutes before firefighters found him, disoriented from smoke, in a maintenance space that wasn't even on the floor plan the fire department had been handed. The kid survived the fire, the article noted almost as an afterthought, but died of complications 3 weeks later, pneumonia, most likely, worsened by smoke damage. The article's follow-up staying frustratingly vague on the details. No room number in the article. But cross-checking an old architectural blueprint she found buried in the hospital's facilities archive, scanned years back for a renovation project and never cleaned off the shared drive, Emily traced that maintenance closet's original spot to almost exactly where room 214's recliner sat now. The same chair where both Oliver and Molly said their quiet, patient visitor liked to sit. She should have stopped digging right there, chalked it up to a creepy coincidence and gotten back to her residency, which was demanding enough without ghost stories piled on top. Instead, unable to drop it, she started quietly requesting 214 whenever it had a patient, telling her supervisor it was just the room closest to her station, and over the following months talked to 4 more kids who described, independently, their own versions of the same lonely boy who liked to talk about doors and darkness and being forgotten. None of them scared of him. All of them, no exceptions, said he seemed like he was waiting on something. It was Oliver, discharged and fully recovered, who accidentally handed Emily the missing piece at a follow-up appointment months later, mentioning almost in passing that the boy in the hospital told him his name, but Oliver couldn't quite remember it. Something old-fashioned, he said, like a grandpa name, and that the boy said nobody ever came looking for him because everybody figured he'd already gone home. Emily, chasing a hunch she couldn't fully justify, went back to that 1962 article, and this time searched county records instead of hospital ones, eventually turning up a short obituary naming the boy. Walter, 7 years old, survived by his parents, no mention of siblings, buried in a cemetery 2 towns over that Emily, on a day off she told nobody about, actually drove out to see. She found the grave right where the plot record said, small and weathered, the kind of headstone that had clearly gone way too long without a visitor. And she stood there longer than she meant to, feeling kind of dumb and unable to leave anyway, before finally saying out loud, to nobody, that she was sorry it took this long for somebody to come looking. No way to know if it changed a thing. But the next kid assigned to room 214, 3 months later, a boy with a fractured femur, mentioned 0 invisible companions during his whole stay, and neither has any kid since. And Emily catches herself walking past that room now with this strange, tangled mix of relief and loss, unable to decide if she solved something or just lost a friend she never got the chance to properly meet.